few years ago, I went camping for the first time in my life. I was about 11 or 12 when we headed out to the forest nearby our house. We were in Poland for the holidays. As every year, and right next to our house, was a huge forest. So one day we decided to take out my mom's old tent. She still had from like the 90s, and just stay for a night or two in between some wildlife. Good thing, the place we chose to sleep was only about 20, maybe 30 minutes away from the house. Bad thing, there are a lot, and I mean a lot of wolves, foxes, and boars out in the forest. And honestly, I kind of regretted going there in the first place. We set everything up around 6 p.m., and my sister and I set up the campfire. My dad chopped down a smaller tree earlier with an oak axe, important later for the story. And by now, it had dried out enough to catch fire. We sat around it for quite some time, probably around 4 hours until it was dark. So we decided to just head to sleep then. My two sisters and I on one end of the tent, and my parents on the other. It was probably just the fear of getting eaten alive by some wolves or homesickness that I couldn't sleep at all. I heard my dad tell my mom that he was going into the forest to get some wood for the morning while it was still fairly dry, or it would have all soaked up the dew by then. The thought of not having my dad around made it even worse for me to even close my eyes for a second. I'm not too good at telling what time it is by just staring at the sky, or trying to figure out how long it has been, so I'll just say it was around 12 or 1 in the morning. I was actually falling asleep when I heard some rattling outside the tent. My first thought, wolf. I was terrified, so just popped my head out through the little curtain that separated the two halves of the tent. Basically a piece of thin fabric just hanging on some threads, to see if my dad was back. He was still gone, and it's been about an hour since he went. I lay back down and tried to fall asleep, but when I turned myself on my side, I saw this faint human shadow outside the tent. I froze and let out a teeny squeak. The person seemed to be holding some sort of axe, shovel type thing in his hand, and so I thought it may have been my dad's back. The shadow walked towards the entrance of the tent and just stood there, at the zipped up door for maybe 30 seconds. I began to wonder why he wasn't just coming inside. The person finally ran off into the forest, but it dropped the axe. You could hear the footsteps fade in the distance and a thump just appear along the way. Maybe a minute or so later, I heard my dad walking back to the opposite side of the forest and into the tent all tired and just fell asleep. It seemed kind of sketchy and fishy and scary to me, but it was late. I couldn't even think anymore and I somehow fell asleep. The next morning I woke up after my dad dropped his phone on his face, letting out an ouch. I peeped through the curtain at him, and he just smiled back while rubbing his nose. I needed some fresh air because I was feeling a bit sick. Maybe from the nerves in the morning or homesickness. I couldn't really tell. Both of us got out of the tent and walked around for a while. We circled around the campsite for around 10 minutes until we got back to our tent. That's when we noticed something that ran chills down my back. A few meters from the tent, in the corner of my eye, I managed to catch a glimpse of something red. It took me a hot second to realize I actually saw something, and when I turned my head to see what it was a red and black rubber axe. It was not there before. I knew it wasn't my dad's because his was by the pile of wood he collected that night. From my dad's reaction, I probably turned pale, because he started to freak out a little, like I was about to pass out or something. He turned his gaze to where I was looking and we both just started to stare for a few seconds, before he called out for the rest of the family to wake up and get moving. We were all packed up within an hour and we rushed back home. I later told my dad what I saw at night, and he wouldn't believe me at first. I carried on with the story and he finally realized I was telling the truth. To this day, I still have no clue who the fuck that was. But I'm just happy he didn't investigate our tent any further, or any other animal out in the forest. To first start this off, I live in a little city in SoCal with my roommate, who happens to be my cousin. During this coronavirus pandemic, however, I've been staying with my parents who live in a very small town in North Cal. Because of my time in SoCal, I really do not like staying in North Cal, and I would rather live back in my apartment. The reason why I haven't done it is because my parents might think I will get very lonely there, since everything is closed down, and my roommate is not there as he's also with his parents. However, since I had to go back for a specific reason, my parents wanted me to take their dog, Mocha, so I wouldn't feel as lonely staying there. I loved her, so I didn't mind one bit. Mocha is a small Pomshy dog that loves to play around with me, and is usually by my side for most of the time. She also loves to go on runs with me, so I occasionally do take her on jogs. On a Wednesday night, I decided to go running with her. Whenever I go on any runs, I go at night because that's the time I get the most energetic. And all the times I went running at night, I never had any type of encounters or occurrences. I put Mocha on a leash and we went off. About 20 minutes into our run, I was running through this creek, and where there was a park next to it, and a bunch of trees surrounding it. Houses to the other side. The trail was pretty narrow, and the street lamps were pretty dim, but still bright enough to see up ahead. As I'm running with music playing, my leash was tugged by Mocha. This usually happens when she wants to go to the bathroom, so I stopped to let her do her thing, and when I turned around, she was in her alert stance, looking straight beyond where I ran. I just assumed that she had seen a squirrel, or any small animal, as she usually does this when she sees one. I was tugging her leash, telling her, "Let's go, there's nothing there." She didn't oblige at first. She just kept looking behind us. It took me about 4 to 5 tugs before she finally came to me. I resumed playing my music and we both went off running. I was almost out of the creek, and then I would meet a narrow sidewalk that was straight ahead. The trail only had a few short turns. Probably a minute or two later, Mocha tugged the leash again, and went on her alert stance behind us. She did an aggressive bark and started growling. I stopped and I was looking around all behind us. I was kind of freaked out because the trail had a couple turns and curves. This means that something was most likely following us. My first guess was a lost dog, which wasn't selling because Mocha is tiny. If it was a big dog, it can easily overpower her. As I was looking around the dim area, for a split second I got a black humanoid figure, about 15 yards away from me, right behind a bush next to a tree. I immediately turned my eyes to the opposite direction and pretended that I didn't see him, but boy was my heart pounding. I didn't see any figures or his face. I just saw the outline of his upper body. I didn't have any weapons on me as self-defense. If this guy is following me, my best situation is to run off without him trying to catch me. I tried to act cool and told Mocha to let's go. The trail was going to end. I just had to make a turn and would be a straight sidewalk for about 300 to 400 yards. There are fences on both sides of the sidewalk, so the only solution was to keep running forward. It went as a jog ride. As I turned the corner and made sure that I was out of view from the person, I went on a full sprint as quietly as I can. The sidewalk ahead of me, so I made sure to just keep on running. I kept looking behind me to see if I was really being followed. About 70 yards away, I saw a person come to view from the turn, and then sprinted as fast as he could towards me. As if I wasn't sprinting, I went sprinting as fast as I could. I've never sprinted as fast in my life. Looking back at it, I'm amazed at how fast I ran. Mocha was keeping up with me. About 100 yards of me sprinting, I looked back. The fucking guy was still running behind me. He had a dark hoodie on, sweatpants, and appeared to be 6 feet tall. He was still in the same distance that I noticed him, which means that he was pretty fast as well. The sidewalk was going to end at about 100 yards, and it will lead to a neighborhood. I can lose him there. I was slowly getting out of breath, and my adrenaline was beginning to die down. I kept sprinting, hoping I wouldn't get too tired quick. 100 yards of me sprinting. I finally made it to the neighborhood out of breath. This neighborhood was pretty broad, so if I were to keep running, this person would have spotted me right away. And at the pace he was running, it didn't seem like it was a good idea. My best solution was to hide. I went straight to a random house and jumped over their backyard, where I would be kept hidden behind the fence. I basically threw Mocha over and myself. We were both panting, but I tried to keep quiet as I heard footsteps coming by. The guy had finished the trail and was now in the neighborhood. He stopped running and I heard him panting. I was hearing him mutter as if he was out of breath. He kept saying, "Fuck. What the fuck?" I was holding Mocha, scratching her so she wouldn't bark or growl. About 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps walking away, and then slowly fading. I waited about 10 minutes in complete silence to be sure that he wasn't too close by. I peeked my head above the fence, and I was all alone now. I got Mocha and went to the opposite direction from where I heard the guy go. Even though I was tired, I tried to jog just so I can get home sooner. I kept looking around me. I was very paranoid that the guy would be there somewhere. I made it back home with no problem, and I got to thank Mocha for pretty much telling me that someone was behind us and stalking us. I don't know how long he was following us or what he was planning to do. I just hope he didn't get a clear glimpse of my face, because I don't want to run up to him again. Hi. For the record, I'm female. I'm turning 19 this year, and the story happened when I was 15. Oh, and also, I'm from France, which can explain my English mistakes if there are any. When I was 15 years old, I just got into junior year. I created my first Twitter account. That I deleted because of this story. Some information. I didn't tell anyone my username. Neither my family nor my friends, because I didn't have any. My profile picture was an avatar, so no pictures of me on the account. And as location I said Paris, because I lived in the suburbs. I didn't have many followers, 20 or maybe 30, and I didn't follow that many people, so my timeline was really not interesting. One evening in October, someone sent me a quite strange direct message. It was a 200 followers account, and the message was, "Hi, my name is Rob. I just turned 17 and wanted to know if you lived in blank, because I will soon move in and go to the town high school. I'm looking for friends." Blank was obviously the town I lived in. I immediately thought something was wrong because there was nowhere on my profile I said where I actually lived. But after some time thinking, I remembered of a tweet I made of weeks ago about buses, and I mentioned the city. So I told myself he just looked up for blank and found my tweet. His age wasn't shocking because I'm 2 years ahead of my classmates. I was bored, and as he was polite, I answered him. I told him I indeed lived in blank, and go to the high school there. The discussion was natural, and we talked about a lot that night. Mainly about high school, about the food at the cafeteria, about the teachers, that kind of thing. But as it was getting very late, he tried to interpose some personal questions. Like, do you live far away from your school? In a house or in an apartment? Do you live with both your parents? There's 5 of you. You're not often home alone, right? I never answered, because it was way too shady for me. And unfortunately, he didn't insist. Unfortunately, because if he did, I would have probably blocked him. The next day, same thing. We talked a lot, and he was still asking personal questions to know me better. So I asked him some too, and he always answered with what seemed like honesty. I still didn't answer the questions about my house though, because he didn't seem to know anything, and it lasted 2 or 3 weeks. But it was enough for me to develop feelings for him. He was handsome, super kind, and it was everything I needed, because I was bullied for years, and even today. I still develop strong feelings, but most importantly, blind trust in people who are friendly to me. In France, in October, we have a 2-week-long vacation, and the day before back to school day, he finally told me he was coming to my high school, because he finally moved in with his mom, and he asked me a place to meet during the morning break. I was so happy and relieved to be able to meet him, and told him to join me in the hall. But when he understood that there would be people around, he said he would prefer an isolated place, because he was afraid he would not recognize me, and didn't want to spend the break looking for me. It was a good excuse for me, so I told him to meet me in the 3rd floor bathroom, because we weren't allowed to stay there during the breaks. and no one would disturb us. In my head, even though it was a little bit creepy, I was still in school, so nothing could happen to me. Next day, back to school, I made myself pretty. I wore my best clothes, and I counted down the minutes. And finally, when my break time arrived, I ran to the bathroom and waited. And when he arrived, it was him. He was not a catfish. He looked quite like his profile picture, but I still noticed that he seemed a little bit older than he told me. I thought 20 years old instead of 17. We talked a lot. We got along well. I was so pleased, and at the end of the break, he even asked me to go get fast food with him for lunch. I said no because I didn't have any money, and I always refuse for people to pay for me. It's a principle. He seemed disappointed, but offered me to walk me home after my classes. I explained I have to take the bus, but that he could walk me to the bus stop. He looked disappointed again, but finally accepted, and that's exactly what happened. And it was great that it quickly became some kind of routine. We met in the third floor bathroom during the morning break, and he walked me to the bus stop after classes. Surprising fact, I never saw him in the hallways, nor at the cafeteria, but I thought at the time that the building was huge, and that there was over 1,500 students in here, so if our schedules didn't coincide, there was no way we could meet each other. The little game lasted until December, so almost a month and a half. The 14th of December, a Thursday, I complained about how lonely I was going to be that evening, because my dad was abroad for work. My brother was always at his friend's house. My little sis was on a school trip, and my mom had to work late that very night. It was very reckless of me, but after weeks, I thought I could trust him. That evening, he walked me to the bus stop. We both waited. I got in the bus and waved at him and put on my earphones. I had 2 stops before my house, and it was about 17:45 in December, so it was already really dark outside. And as I got out of the bus, I had a really bad feeling. There was that very uncomfortable sensation in my stomach, and I felt like being observed. I pressed pause on my music, but kept my earphones on, so that people thought I couldn't hear anything. And that's probably what saved my life. I live in a suburban neighborhood, very silent, especially at night, with no visibility on the big road. The bus passed in. When I heard footsteps behind me, I understood I was right. There was someone following me, and he was not well intentioned. At least I could hear that he was not accelerating, so he was not trying to catch up to me. But I couldn't guess how long it would last. As quietly as possible, I tried to reach for my keys in my pocket, and when I finally pulled them out, I ran as fast as I could. The best sprint of my life. I don't know how it worked, but I managed to open and close the door before he could reach me. I then deactivated my alarm, which by the way confirmed that I was home alone, and took a long look through a glass panel on the door. It was not a peephole, it was a whole window. So if someone went to see what's happening inside, they can. It was Rob, a few meters away, looking at me with a really creepy face. He followed me to my home, probably with a car, and he was clearly not here for a chit-chat. I still don't know why I didn't call the police. I was totally paralyzed. We both stared at each other for a minute, and when I took back control over my body, I ran to the kitchen to get a knife. I got back to the door, and he was there too, banging against the door. I feared for a second that the glass would break, but it didn't happen. That moment when I pushed against the door, praying for it not to break while he was kicking harder and harder, was the longest I've ever experienced. After maybe 5 minutes, he stopped. He got around the house, knocking against every shutter, and got back to the door. He looked very angry. But then my neighbor's car reached my house, and Rob ran away, probably thinking that was my mom coming home. On Twitter, Rob sent me 1,000 messages before I could block him. He then deleted his account, and I thought I was done with this story, but quickly after, some accounts which had just been created followed me. Their at were all a series of numbers and the first letter of his name, and as soon as I blocked one, another one followed me. I chose to delete my account because I couldn't make it stop. and it was too hard to endure because they were sending me dozens of insulting DMs. Later, I talked to the people who were supposed to be Rob's classmates, because I haven't met him again in days, but not a single one of them has ever heard about Rob. This guy was never a student in my high school. That is why I've never met him apart from my daily meetings, and that's probably why he seems so old. I never heard about him anymore, and I'm still asking myself, what did he want? And what could have happened that night? So, Rob, let's never meet again. First, let me start off with some background. I've been going to the gym for about 6 years consistently every single day, and mostly in the evenings around 8 or 9 p.m. And my workouts usually last until 10 or 11 p.m. Around summer of 2018, I switched to LA Fitness, which is a really big health club chain, etc. I've been going there for about 6 months when an older man around his 30s, early 40s, I say old because I was 18 at the time, and that seemed old to me, began to approach me nearly every single time I was at the gym. He was Hispanic, shorter, around 5'8", and I believe he told me his name. I forgot it. As well as how old he was, which I also forgot. Now keep in mind I am 18 years old, 5'2" female, so in the beginning I took his attentions to be friendly, and I was friendly back to him. But tried to end conversations quickly because he liked to chat for a long time, and I just wanted to get my workouts done. In the beginning, when he first started approaching me, he would tell me that he thought I was very beautiful, that he would love to take me out for dinner, drinks, etc. He asked for my name and how old I was, which I told him because I thought it was innocent enough. He also told me that he had a very young daughter with his ex, whom he described as psycho, and he told me that he would love for me to meet his daughter. Obviously, I brushed all these invites off, and eventually I began to get really annoyed. I would dread showing up to the gym because I didn't want to be approached by him. One day, after about a year of him approaching me nearly every day, regardless of me changing my times and going to the gym, he would spend hours there. An older gentleman who was exercising a bike began to notice this man come up to me. By this time, I had been ignoring the creepy guy every single time he approached me for several weeks, pretending to focus extra hard on my workout and be listening to my music. He stood next to me and began speaking, calling my name and trying to get my attention, but I just kept ignoring. After a few minutes, I guess he started feeling awkward and walked away. The gentleman behind me got my attention and told me that he had seen this guy talking to me several times, and even watching me work out from a distance every time I was at the gym, and that I should report him and straight up tell him to leave me alone, because what he was doing was harassment. I told him thank you and just decided to brush it off, as him just being an extra creepy dude. The next time he tried to approach me, I told him to leave me alone, that I had a boyfriend and that I was not interested. After that, he left me alone. Occasionally, I would work out with one of my friends who told me she had noticed a stranger, older Hispanic man watching me work out at the gym, but I just brushed that off too. I know I sound really stupid. I truly thought he wasn't a threat though. Flash forward December of 2019. I was near the end of my workout. It was around 11 p.m. when I noticed him at the gym. I didn't think he had spotted me yet, so as soon as I saw him, I decided to cut my workout short and began walking to the front doors of the gym. I had one headphone in and one out, just in case. The gym was relatively empty by that time, so I was a little nervous to walk alone to my car, in the dark, even though I had parked close to the entrance. As I was about to reach the doors, I hear him calling my name. "Stephanie! Stephanie!" I immediately began to panic, and I started walking faster. I shit you not, started tapping my back and gripping my arm, still saying my name. By this point, some people in the gym had started to pay attention, and I briefly turned to him and yanked my arm away. I ran out of the gym and to my car and locked the doors and left. He had never done anything like that before, so I was so shaken by it. By the time I went to work out again the next day around 8 p.m., I had talked myself out of being scared and decided I would just keep an eye open and be extra cautious of him if he showed up. I was working out by the dumbbell area on the far end of the gym, where the benches are and a mirror spanning the whole wall. Machines and workout equipment were behind me, and through the mirror I could see everything going on. I see him enter and walk to a machine a few feet behind me, and so I begin hurrying my workout. I finish the set of exercises I'm doing, and I look up into the mirror to see what he's doing, and I see him smiling at me from the machine to the mirror. I get immediate goosebumps and begin to put all my equipment away. I avoid looking in his direction or the mirror at all. When I came back to pick up my water bottle, which I had left on the bench I was working out on, I briefly noticed something sitting on the bench next to mine. I looked at the mirror to scan my surrounding area. Right next to me is him, again, staring at me in the mirror. Extremely on edge and nervous by this point, I immediately leave, asking one of the front desk attendants to walk me to my car. I got in my car and locked the doors and called my boyfriend to tell him what had happened. After 10 minutes of talking in the parking lot, I noticed a big truck directly across from me turn on and turn their brights on straight to my face. I thought it was strange, so I squinted into the light to see who might be there. It was just the outline of a smaller man. I quickly realized it must have been the guy from the gym, and so I booked it out of there, checking my mirrors to see if anyone was following me. By that time I was shaking, and I noticed the truck pulling out of the parking lot and driving behind me. I still couldn't clearly make out who it was, but I was freaking out. I drove almost all the way home, with the same truck still behind me. I quickly realized I couldn't literally just lead this guy to my house, because out of all the stupid things I'd done so far, that would have been the stupidest. I pulled into the grocery store parking lot that was lit and really populated and waited to see what he would do. He kept driving past me, and I waited 20 minutes before driving home, making sure I was not being followed. After all of that, you would think that I would change gyms and call the police. Well, no. 18-year-old me still denied that it was 100% him, or that anything would happen to me. The rest of the week, I had no encounters of him, and so the incident began to leave my mind. The next Tuesday, it was January 2020 now. I was at the gym once again around 11 p.m. I had finished my workout and was about to leave. I hadn't really paid attention to whether the guy was there or not, and I scanned the gym once before leaving, but I didn't see anything. I headed to my car, got in, forgot to lock the doors, and sat there texting my boyfriend, asking when he would call. We were long distance at the time, so we usually called at night. All of a sudden, someone started knocking on my window. I jumped slightly and looked out of my car, and it was him. He starts calling my name, and I can see him reaching down the door handle. Somehow in those few moments, I remember I hadn't locked my doors, and I immediately hit the lock button. The smile that was formed on his face is one that I will never ever forget. He looked almost smug, like he knew that even that wouldn't help me. He began banging at my window, telling me to unlock and open the door repeatedly. Eventually, he moved to pulling on the door handle. In retrospect, I realized my first instinct should have been to call the police. But in that moment, I decided to call my boyfriend. My phone instantly hooked up to my car's Bluetooth, and it started to ring very loudly, even on the outside. I think that's what saved me. As soon as he heard the ringing, I assumed he believed I was calling the police, and he immediately ran away and got into his car, one over from mine. He pulled out, and it was the same big truck that had been shining its headlights at me, and had been following me almost all the way home a week before. I was shaking with fear and talking to my boyfriend, explaining what had happened, and I also called my mom and told her what had happened. I don't know why, but I never called the police to report it, mostly because I wasn't sure if they would believe me, or that I had any evidence to back me up. But I have since then changed gyms, gotten a taser, and I work out only during the day. And I look over my shoulder every single time I'm somewhere alone. I still wonder what would have happened that night if I hadn't remembered my doors were unlocked. He could have been a rapist, kidnapper, serial killer, sex trafficker, anything. Even just a desperate man. Either way, weird gym dude. Let's not meet. When I was young, my friends and I would always play outside at a park near my house. The park was near a small patch of woods, so when we got bored, we would try to climb the trees or gawk at the deer or other small animals we could find. One day, as we were playing a game of tag, a tall man walked up to the edge of the playground. He had a pale, sickly-looking skin covered with dirty rags, and he spoke in a creepy, childlike voice that sounded like he was trying his best to seem non-threatening. We had been told to stay away from strangers, but this one only wanted to play tag with us, so we allowed him to. I was a tagger, and I eventually tagged everyone else except the strange man. I also saw him and sprinted as fast as my 8-year-old legs could carry me, and the man ran away from me into the woods. Being fiercely competitive, I didn't even stop to think about what I was doing, and carried on chasing him. We went deep into the woods, with him slowly slowing down to almost a walking pace. When I reached him, I tagged him, and as soon as I touched his dirty clothes, he grabbed my hand in a cold, clammy grasp. He dragged me further away from the playground as I screamed and cried and begged for him to let me go. As I mentioned before, the woods weren't very dense and had houses on either side. If I was loud enough, I just might get someone to hear me. He slapped me and had a panicked, crazed look in his eyes. He honestly looked more scared than me. He dragged me farther away from the playground, but I persisted, screaming until my lungs collapsed. All of a sudden, he let go and started to bolt the other way. I was confused and mostly relieved, until I saw a man sprinting towards us at full speed. I feared my luck had only worsened, and made a move to run away, but I could barely move a muscle. I was so scared and exhausted. The dude got to me and scooped me up, as I was sobbing and whimpering like an infant. He tried to ask me questions, but I was too much in a hysteric to answer. He gave up trying to question me and called the police. I got reunited with my parents and counseling, but the dude was never found and arrested. So please, creepy sounding kidnapper, please, let's never meet again. Hey friends, thanks for watching the video. If you have any suggestions for the next video, I'd love to see them in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon and hit all notifications to get notified when I drop a new video or stream. And if you'd like to get early access to my videos before anyone else, please consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a channel member, where you get that and some other fun perks for just $1 a month. Also, I have my podcast now available with all my past videos. That can be found on all major podcast services. Also, I have some merch available now over on Spreadshirt. All links to these and my social medias will be in the description field down below. And remember, never go scuba diving in your own toilet after Taco Tuesday.